There's something magical about airports, isn't there? That unique blend of anticipation and possibility that hangs in the air like a fine mist, enveloping everyone who passes through those sliding glass doors. For me, airports have always represented freedom, the promise of new horizons, unexpected adventures, and sometimes, if the universe aligns just right, the most surprising of human connections. I remember checking my reflection in the bathroom mirror before heading to my gate, adjusting the collar of my light blue linen shirt, and running a hand through my carefully tousled hair. Travel days are my runway days, as I like to say. Even after a red-eye, I believe in looking put together. You never know who you might meet at 30,000 feet. Little did I know just how prophetic that thought would be on this particular Tuesday morning. I was headed to Palm Springs for a week of desert relaxation, pool parties, and catching up with friends who had escaped the dreary Pacific Northwest winter months before I could manage to get away. My flight was scheduled for 10:45 a.m., a perfect mid-morning departure that would have me poolside by early afternoon. But as I approached the departure board, that dreaded red text appeared next to my flight number. Delayed 3 hours. Let me tell you, there are few things more deflating than a significant flight delay when you're already mentally mixing your first vacation cocktail. I let out an audible sigh, drawing sympathetic glances from fellow travelers equally disappointed by the electronic harbinger of bad news. Rather than wallow in airport purgatory, I decided to approach the customer service desk to explore my options. The line was predictably long, filled with frustrated passengers gesturing emphatically and service agents maintaining their professional composure despite the mounting tension. When I finally reached the counter, I was greeted by Marjorie, whose name tag was adorned with various airline pins collected over what I imagined were decades of service. "How can I help you today?" she asked, fingers already poised over her keyboard, ready to work whatever airline magic she could muster. I explained my situation, making sure to be polite. "I've always believed you catch more flies with honey than vinegar, especially when it comes to airline staff who hold your travel fate in their hands." "Let me see what I can do for you," Marjorie said, her eyes scanning her screen. "There's another flight leaving in 40 minutes that I could rebook you on. It's nearly full, but—" She paused, typing furiously. "I do have one seat available." She looked up at me with a slight smile. "It's in row 1. Would that work for you?" "Row 1. First class." Was this a trick question? "That would be more than acceptable," I replied, trying to contain my excitement. Marjorie handed me my new boarding pass with a wink. "Sometimes delays work in our favor," she said. I thanked her profusely, already mentally updating my social media with this unexpected turn of events. As I made my way to the new gate, I couldn't help but feel like I'd won some sort of travel lottery. My original booking had been in premium economy, comfortable enough, but hardly luxurious. Now I was headed to row 1, the holy grail of domestic air travel. I arrived at the gate just as boarding was beginning, joining the priority line with a newfound sense of belonging. When they called for first-class passengers, I stepped forward with my boarding pass, still half expecting someone to stop me and reveal it had all been a mistake. But no such interruption came. I walked down the jet bridge, adjusting my carry-on bag and straightening my posture as I prepared to enter this elevated realm of air travel. The flight attendant greeted me warmly at the door. "Welcome aboard. Turn right, and you'll find your seat in row 1. Those words were music to my ears. I turned right instead of the usual left, entering the cabin where the seats were wider, the legroom more generous, and the pre-departure beverage options included actual glassware. Row 1 consisted of just 2 seats, divided by a wide center console. The window seat was already occupied, but I couldn't see its inhabitant as I approached from behind. I stowed my bag in the overhead compartment, taking perhaps a bit more time than necessary as I savored this unfamiliar luxury. When I finally settled into my aisle seat, I turned to acknowledge my seatmate and felt my breath catch slightly. He was striking in that effortlessly handsome way that some men seem to possess, like they've been blessed by some genetic lottery that the rest of us weren't even invited to enter. Dark hair with just the right amount of silver at the temples, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes the color of bourbon in sunlight. He wore a charcoal gray cashmere sweater over what appeared to be a crisp white shirt, and even seated, his tall frame was evident. He looked up from his book. I noticed it was Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles, which immediately earned him points in my estimation. and offered a smile that transformed his serious features into something altogether more approachable. "Looks like we're neighbors for the next few hours," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Daniel." "James," I replied, taking his hand and noting the firm grip and the subtle scent of an expensive cologne I couldn't quite place. "Pleasure to meet you." Our hands lingered perhaps a second longer than strictly necessary for a polite introduction. I settled into my seat, acutely aware of his presence beside me. The flight attendant approached with pre-departure drinks, and I opted for sparkling water while Daniel chose orange juice. "Saving the champagne for when we're actually in the air," he explained with a conspiratorial smile. "It tastes better above the clouds, don't you think?" I couldn't help but return his smile. "Absolutely. Everything tastes better at altitude. It's science." This earned a laugh from him, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to vibrate through the space between us. As the remaining passengers filed past us toward the main cabin, Daniel and I fell into easy conversation. He was headed to Palm Springs as well, staying at a boutique hotel not far from where my friends had rented a house. He was in tech, something involving artificial intelligence that he explained in terms simple enough for me to follow without feeling condescended to. I shared that I worked in architectural design, specializing in sustainable commercial spaces. "So you make the world more beautiful and more responsible at the same time," he observed, and the way he framed my career made me see it through fresh eyes. There was something about Daniel that made me want to impress him, to appear as the best version of myself. It wasn't just his obvious physical appeal, though that certainly didn't hurt, but rather the attentive way he listened, how he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. The safety demonstration began, and we paused our conversation to dutifully watch the flight attendants demonstrate how to fasten a seatbelt, as if none of us had ever encountered this complex mechanism before. Daniel caught my eye during the oxygen mask portion and mimicked placing the mask over his face with an exaggerated expression that made me stifle a laugh. There was something wonderfully conspiratorial about sharing this small moment of humor amidst the serious business of airline safety. As the plane began to taxi, our conversation turned to travel stories. Daniel had just returned from Japan a month earlier and described the cherry blossoms in Kyoto with such vivid detail that I could almost see them floating on the breeze. I countered with tales from my trip to Portugal last summer, the narrow streets of Lisbon, and the breathtaking coastline of the Algarve. We discovered a shared love for getting lost in new cities, for finding those hidden gems that don't make it into guidebooks. The plane accelerated down the runway, that familiar push back into our seats as we defied gravity once again. I've always loved takeoffs, that moment when the wheels leave the ground and you're suddenly airborne, suspended between earth and sky. There's something both terrifying and exhilarating about it, a reminder of human ingenuity and our relentless desire to overcome our limitations. As we climbed through the clouds, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and the flight attendant approached to take our drink orders. True to his word, Daniel requested champagne, and I decided to join him. When in row 1, I quipped, and he nodded in approval. Our glasses clinked in a toast to unexpected upgrades and new acquaintances. It was somewhere between that first sip of champagne and our continued conversation about favorite travel destinations that had happened. Daniel reached down to the control panel between our seats and, with a smooth motion, raised the divider that separated us. The action was casual, almost reflexive, but it sent a cascade of questions through my mind. Was this a signal? A boundary being established? Had I misread the energy between us? The divider now stood like a physical manifestation of uncertainty between us. I tried to keep my expression neutral, not wanting to betray my confusion or, if I'm being honest, my slight disappointment. Our conversation had been flowing so naturally, the chemistry undeniable, at least from my perspective. Had I imagined it? Daniel must have noticed the momentary flicker in my expression because he leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. "I hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the divider. "I just thought it might be nice to have a bit more privacy for our conversation." There was something in his eyes as he said this, a warmth, an invitation, that made my earlier concerns evaporate like morning mist in sunshine. Let me explain why this matters. That divider wasn't creating distance between us. It was creating a cocoon, a private world suspended in the sky, where our conversation could unfold without the curious glances of flight attendants or neighboring passengers. It was an intimate gesture, not a distancing one. And as I realized this, I felt a flutter of anticipation in my chest. Privacy is always appreciated, I replied, matching his tone, especially when the conversation is this engaging. The flight attendant returned with warm nuts and took our lunch orders. Daniel opted for the salmon, while I chose the chicken. And perhaps another round of champagne, Daniel suggested, raising an eyebrow in question. I nodded my agreement, settling deeper into my seat as our private bubble in the sky grew more comfortable by the minute. As our flight continued, our conversation deepened beyond travel anecdotes and career highlights. Daniel shared that he'd recently ended a 5-year relationship, his first time being single in his 30s. It's strange, he admitted, swirling the champagne in his glass. I thought I'd feel more adrift, but there's a freedom in rediscovering who you are outside of a partnership. He looked at me with those bourbon-colored eyes. Have you ever experienced that? I told him about my own relationship history, the college boyfriend who remained a close friend, the 3-year relationship that ended when he took a job in London, the more recent dates that never quite evolved into anything substantial. I think I've been single long enough to know myself pretty well, I said. The challenge now is finding someone who complements that self-knowledge rather than complicates it. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly it. It's not about finding someone to complete you. That's a dangerous myth. It's about finding someone who sees you completely and appreciates what they see. Our lunch arrived, temporarily pausing our philosophical exploration of modern relationships. The food was surprisingly good for airline fare, though I suspect anything would have tasted exceptional in that moment, with that company. We shared bites from each other's plates, comparing notes on the flavors and textures. There was something undeniably intimate about this simple act of sharing food, our forks occasionally brushing against each other's plates. After lunch, the conversation flowed as freely as the champagne. We discovered a shared love of mid-century modern architecture, another reason we were both drawn to Palm Springs. Daniel had restored a 1960s home in Seattle, preserving its original features while updating it for modern living. I told him about my dream of designing a completely sustainable desert home that would honor the landscape while leaving minimal impact. You should see it, he said suddenly. My house in Seattle, when you're back in the Northwest. The invitation hung in the air between us, full of possibility. It wasn't just about seeing his home. It was about seeing each other again, about extending whatever was happening between us beyond the confines of this flight. I'd like that, I replied, and the smile that spread across his face made my heart skip in a way I hadn't experienced in quite some time. As our flight began its descent into Palm Springs, there was a palpable shift in the energy between us. The ephemeral nature of our connection was suddenly apparent. In less than 30 minutes, we would return to solid ground, and the spell might be broken. I felt an urgency to solidify something before we landed, to ensure that this wasn't just a pleasant interlude in the sky, but the beginning of something more. Daniel seemed to sense this too. As the flight attendant collected our glasses and reminded us to return our seats to the upright position, he turned to face me fully. I know this might seem forward, he began, but would you be interested in dinner tonight? There's a restaurant at the Parker I've been wanting to try. The relief I felt was immediate and overwhelming. I would love that, I replied, perhaps a bit too quickly. But Daniel's answering smile told me my enthusiasm was matched by his own. We exchanged phone numbers as the plane touched down, the slight bump of wheels meeting tarmac a reminder that we were returning to the real world. The divider between us remained raised, but it no longer represented a question. Instead, it had become a symbol of the private connection we'd established, a shared secret above the clouds. As we taxied to the gate, Daniel lowered the divider, our private cocoon opening back up to the world. But something had been established in that enclosed space. A connection, a possibility, a story just beginning to unfold. We gathered our belongings as the plane came to a complete stop, and I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Excitement about the evening ahead, gratitude for the unexpected upgrade that had placed me in row 1, and a sense of wonder at how quickly life can change course. Walking through Palm Springs International Airport, our shoulders occasionally brushing as we made our way to baggage claim, I couldn't help but reflect on the serendipitous nature of it all. A delayed flight, a kind airline employee, an empty seat in row 1 next to a handsome stranger who raised the divider not to create distance, but to create intimacy. "What are you smiling about?" Daniel asked as we waited for our luggage to appear on the carousel. "Just thinking about how sometimes the best journeys are the ones we never planned to take," I replied. He nodded, his hand briefly touching the small of my back in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. "Here's to unplanned journeys," he said softly. As we walked out into the bright Palm Springs sunshine, I couldn't help but think that sometimes the most meaningful connections happen when we least expect them, when flights get delayed, when we find ourselves unexpectedly in row 1, and when someone raises the divider after takeoff, not to separate, but to create a world just for two. That evening at the Parker, over cocktails and conversation that flowed as easily as it had at 30,000 feet, I realized that the true luxury of that flight hadn't been the wider seats or the champagne in real glassware. It had been the rare opportunity to connect with someone in a meaningful way, suspended between departure and arrival, between past and future, in that liminal space where new possibilities are born. And as Daniel reached across the table to take my hand, his bourbon eyes reflecting the candlelight, I silently thanked that delayed flight, Marjorie with her collection of airline pins, and yes, even that raised divider in row 1. All the seemingly random elements that had aligned to create this perfect moment of connection. Because sometimes, the most beautiful destinations are the ones we never knew we were traveling toward. Total _char_count, 17,856.